Hello, crafty friends. My name is Jessica, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I have a card for you using some items from the Splendor release with Simon Says Stamp. There's actually an Instagram hop happening, so be sure you check it out. Now, I do show you that stamp set there at the end, but I do not end up using it, and I'll discuss that as I get further into the video. But first, we're going to start off with some black cardstock. This is Simon Says Stamp black cardstock, and I'm going to use some anti-static powder to prep the surface because I plan on embossing these sweet little bunnies. So this is me just fiddling to ensure that I find some spacing where I can move the paper and get multiple bunnies stamped. I'm going to be using Simon Says Stamp Clear ink. This is a brand new ink pad. It's super juicy and it gives a really, really great impression. I'm really happy with the quality of this ink. I do a second stamp just because when you have stamps, sometimes it takes two stampings to get the stamp primed. And now we're going to be using Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Embossing Powder. I had a vision of gold gilded bunnies, and this is the card where it comes to fruition. So I know I want multiple amounts of bunnies. I'm going to be covering a card panel, and so this is just trying to ensure that I use up all the space and fill it up with all these lovely bunnies. Now, I got a little bit of powder where I didn't want it, so I use a craft paintbrush to go ahead and knock that powder off before I heat set it. Once you heat set it, there are some solutions to get that off, and we'll talk about that later, but sometimes you can't. So you just want to be mindful of trying to remove all of the powder that you don't want on your panel off before you go ahead and ink set it. Now, I did use an anti-static powder, but I'm noticing that I'm still getting a little bit of cling. So I don't think I did a good enough job laying a good amount down before I went into this. Now, we had a little magic off camera where I went ahead and heat set these bunnies that I laid down. And then I'm going back in and adding one or two more to ensure that I have enough for my card panel. After we add this last bunny, we're going to go ahead and add on all the tails. This is a lovely layering stamp set, and there are about 3 to 4 layers for each bunny. There is an ear, the ear shadow, nose, and eye, and the tail. And so it's really fun to build these bunnies up. But for this particular technique where I'm using gold, we're going to do a lot of mostly gold building, but then we're going to add a little fun at the end. I realized after I stamped all of these that I am using the wrong part of the stamp set. I'm using the one that does the pink inlay on the ear and the nose when I should have been using the ear. It ends up working out, but I just realized, oops, I was supposed to use that one and I used the other one. So I'm going to be sure for the other bunnies, the small ones, that I use the right ear in order to get the right look. Like I said, it doesn't matter. It's more of just myself noticing that I used the wrong one and I wish I hadn't. So we're going to go ahead and heat set this now that I have the ears done. And you can see here, voila, that it is complete. And now we're going to add the tails. But instead of gold, I'm going to add white. There is one little hiccup with this, but we'll talk about that later. But really excited on how this looked, and I'm going to try it again in the future. You'll notice I'm using my waffle flower grip mat. This is for two reasons. One, so that it'll hold my paper as I'm stamping since I am using a stamp block. And two, to get that squish when you're using stamps, you want to use something like a waffle flower mat or an embossing folder or a foam piece, something. You're going to get better impression when you're stamping into something soft. Now, I did just make a big mess with my white embossing powder. I went to dump it off and dumped it outside of the bowl. Embossing powder is the worst to clean up, and I'm one of those people that does not like the feeling. Here we go. These are the white little tails added on these little gilded bunnies, and I'm loving the look, the black and white and gold. So now we're going to fussy cut the rest of these little images out for the back of our panel. I'm planning on spattering them all over that panel, kind of in different directions. So I needed quite a few of them. I am somebody who loves fussy cutting, but they do have dies for this set if you're not on the fussy cutting train. The trick with fussy cutting is ensuring that you have thin, sharp scissors as well as making sure that you're moving the paper versus the scissors. We'll talk about that in a minute. I want to call attention to this eraser. So I had some embossing powder that was on the page where I didn't want it. So you can use this little eraser or a handheld eraser and use that to buff the melted embossing powder off. It's a really great little tool, especially when you're using black cardstock and you have that over powder that got melted. It's a great way to clean it up very quickly. So as I was saying, the two things for fussy cutting is sharp scissors, thin scissors, and making sure that you move your paper. When you're moving your hand to cut, you're putting out more exertion to get that thing or the item cut out. Where if you move the paper, you have better control. You can make those corners a lot easier. And I find that I have a consistent way of keeping a border around the image when I do it this way. I'm going to go ahead and snap my fingers and we're going to jump ahead to having all the fussy cutting done and move into the next step of building this card. So off camera, I went ahead and embossed a black panel of the Rhythmic Waves embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp. Before that, I'm going to make my card base. I like to use Neenah 110 pound solar white. And then here is the background panel that we're using for the back of these bunnies. To get a really good impression with this background panel, I do like to spritz water onto it while I'm embossing it or before I emboss it so that you can see the extra little lines in between the little waves. I wasn't getting that when I wasn't spritzing with water. So I went ahead and used some dot roller to go ahead and adhere it to this card. And now I'm using Simon Says Stamp foam squares that have the thicker loft to pop these bunnies up for some added dimension. Now, originally I had mentioned that I loved the white little tails, but as I build this card, you're going to notice that I'm going to end up cutting off almost every single one of them except for one. And I didn't realize it until I was cutting that I somehow left all of the butts off the panel but the one. But I wanted to have the little bunny looking at the mommy bunny or the larger bunny in a like an affectionate way. That's kind of where I was going with for. And so because of the way I laid out the big ones, it just ended up working that all of their fluff butts were off of the panel except for the one I just adhered. A way to change this up a little bit to create even more dimension would be to only pop up the big bunnies and then glue with liquid glue the little bunnies back to the panel so that you create the stair step between the two images. Or you could use a less lofty foam square as well. That just would give it some more playfulness and just add another level to the complexity of this card. Now we're all set. I'm going to go ahead and turn this card panel over and trim off the little butts that are hanging off. And I like to use a big pair of scissors that are a little bit more sturdy than my thin, fine detail scissors. And these are the Simon Says Stamp Everyday scissors. And they're great because I have yet to find adhesive that sticks to it over time so that it doesn't get gummy. And they're great. So here I'm kind of realizing I cut off all of the bunny butts and I was trying to see if I could add a couple more back in order to bring in some of that white, and I was unable to do so. So now we're going to add the sentiment, and this is where I'm determining that oh hello there was way too big. It was going to cover up a lot of the bunnies, and you weren't going to know what they were. So I pivoted to these reverse sentiments that were also released during the Splendor release that just happened here in the beginning of February. And I went ahead and picked out the one that said, "You're my good luck charm." I thought that was appropriate with a card full of little bunnies. And so we're going to go ahead and use that one. I trimmed the sentiment pretty thin, and now I'm trimming off the edges for a close cut. And what I like to do with these reverse sentiments is I like to use a black marker to cover up the white around the edge of the sentiment. It just adds an extra completeness to this card by giving an extra step and making it look complete. So here I am just fiddling, trying to determine where I'm going to put it. And I did decide that I'm going to put it right there. But because the bunnies are popped up, I do need to use a little bit of foam tape behind the portion of the sentiment that is not going to be on the bunny to ensure that you get a seamless and flat sentiment. So Simon Says Stamp just released these 3D foam strips, and I'm so excited because Doris used to be the one that had these foam strips, and they quit making them, or I'm not 100% sure what's going on, but I'm glad that Simon Says Stamp decided to bring out their own. These strips are not only good for adding to the back of these reverse sentiments, but they're also good for making shaker cards. I did also add some liquid glue to the side that is on the bunny to ensure that the proper adhesive for the whole sentiment lays flat. So I'm using an ink block just to go ahead and put pressure on that. And now it's time for the jewels. These are the clear jewels or gems that Simon Says Stamp just released for the Splendor release, and they are so good. There are 3 different sizes, and a decent amount of gems are included in the little round containers. I absolutely love these. They also bought the rainbow colored ones, and they're beautiful. I can't wait to use them. So once I have the jewels where I want them, I'm going to go ahead and lay them down with some Barely Art glue, and I'm using my Simon Says Stamp jewel picker to ensure that this is super easy. I love these wax tip jewel pickers. The only slight issue is you want to make sure you baby them, because I had one roll off my desk and it fell on the wax tip end and it completely ruined it. I know you can buy replacements for them, so I like to have a few on hand just to make sure in case something happened. So I'm going to add a little bit of white to the eyes on all the bunnies, and that's going to finish the card today. Be sure to check out the description for links to all the products that I used today, as well as make sure that you subscribe so that you're notified for my next video. I appreciate you being here. Take care.